practice as a heartfelt practice. That, the English word mindfulness is the usual translation. It's the translation of the Pali word sati. And generally, sati means to hold something in awareness. And when the Chinese translated the Indian Buddhist terms into Chinese characters, sati became a character that had two halves. The top half of the character represents the present moment, and the bottom half of the character is the word for heart. And so that combination suggests that mindfulness is connected to the heart, to being heartfelt in the present moment. And it shows us the possibility of holding our experience in our hearts, to having an accepting, soft, and spacious awareness toward whatever's occurring. Sometimes mindfulness can be a little bit dry, especially when you're kind of trying to bring insight to what's happening, and you're kind of saying in your mind, let's see, the Four Noble Truths, the four foundations of mindfulness. Let's see, where does this fall in? What hindrance is that? It can, the practice of insight itself sometimes can feel dry, and it involves a detached and objective sort of what seems to be an unfeeling attitude toward our experience in the present moment. But that attitude arises when mindfulness is confused with a subtle fear, or a distance, a resistance, or a judgment. And luckily, the mindfulness practice is self-correcting. The continual effort to notice what's actually going on in the present will eventually reveal the subtle tensions that underlies the detached attitude. And that was one of the things I was sort of noticing as I was talking today, that especially while talking, there's a detachment from the practice because I'm, externally verbalizing it, and that makes it seem dry. But it corrects itself by constantly making the effort to notice what's actually going on in the present. So, like, while I was talking, then I would notice there was this slight agitation in the mind that was like tightening around the speaking, and yet bringing this kind of heart energy to it. In moment-to-moment awareness, brought it around. And, if we can clearly recognize the dryness of practice, then that can be a signal that helps us reestablish a softer and more tender presence. And alternately, it can be an indication that we need to hold the very dryness with soft acceptance. Many of us have hearts that are encrusted with anxieties and fears, aversions, sorrows, an array of defensive armor. The reactive, the non-reactive, and accepting awareness of mindfulness helps dissolve the crust by being less reactive and being accepting of awareness of mindfulness. It's an ideal, but we work on it minute by minute. The practice has a cyclical quality. It's self-reinforcing. So at first the practice allows us to let go of a little amount of defensiveness. And then that release allows a corresponding amount of openness and tender-heartedness to show itself. And this process encourages us to drop even more of our protection. Slowly, a greater sense of heartfeltness supports the further development of mindfulness. So as our erotic thought patterns drop away and layers of judgment and resistance sort of atrophy, the need to define ourselves through hard-held identities can relax. And as this happens, the natural goodness of our heart shines by itself. The impulses to be aware and happy and compassionate and free all comes from the goodness of our hearts. As we connect to these intentions and allow them to motivate our mindfulness practice, then the practice becomes heartfelt. And this can lead naturally into the practice of dana, the first of the three teachings that the Buddha laid out, which is why that idea of spring just kind of made me think of generosity. That the giving, the practice of giving, or dana in Pali, has a primary place in the teachings of the Buddha. And when he taught a graduated series of practices for people to engage in as they progress along the path. And he always started by talking about the importance of the benefits of the practice of generosity. Now in the West, the meditation practice came first. And so we kind of started catching up with ourselves now, like 20 years later, that the foundation, the trio that the Buddha taught of dana and sila and bhavana was that the practice of generosity is the foundation, that's the first practice, and that the based on that foundation, then there was importance with the benefit of the practice of ethics, of harmonious living, that's sila. And so he discussed the practices of calming the mind after he described the insight practices supported by calm and stable mind leading to enlightenment. So with the practice of generosity as the base and harmonious living, then calming the mind and learning the meditation practices are easier to do. And then it cycles around again, because then once a person had become awakened, the Buddha would often instruct him or her to go out to benefit others and to be of service. And service can be seen as an act of generosity. So the Buddhist path begins and ends with the virtue of generosity. There's, some of you know Achan Sucitto. He was a British-born Theravadan monk, the abbot of Chittaviveka in Chithurst, a Buddhist monastery in West Sussex. And he has a quote. See if I can find it here. The Buddha taught to begin first with generosity and morality. The mutuality they constellate begins to erode the personality shell. Morality means mutual respect. With this mutuality, you are enriched and you realize the beauty of the heart. And I'm sure you've heard this quote before. It's from the Itivuttaka. If beings knew, this is what the Buddha is reported to have said, if beings knew as I know the results of giving and sharing, they would not eat without having given, nor would the stain of selfishness overcome their minds, even if it were their last bite. Their last mouthful, they would not eat without having shared, if there were someone to receive their gift. And so you always hear stories. I hear them about Munindraji from Kamala, when Munindra would be visiting her in Maui, and how she would go off to work, and she'd come back, and he would have eaten his meal, and he would leave crumbs out to share. There's plenty of mice there, and there's also cockroaches and lots of ants. And he would leave food out to share with them because of this quote, amongst other things, but because of the act of giving and sharing. And there are a couple of ways of thinking about generosity. One is as a spontaneous and natural expression of an open mind and an open heart. And when we're connected wholeheartedly with others in the world, you don't make it like a decision to give. Giving simply flows out of us. And this type of generosity is like the generosity of a mother with a child. And then another way of understanding generosity as a practice itself, a practice of generosity, where we can begin even though it may not automatically be flowing out of us. We take generosity on as a practice. It has two important parts because first it helps us connect with others and with ourselves. And giving creates a relationship between the giver and the receiver. So acts of generosity help us learn more about the nature of our relationships, and it develops those relationships. Practicing generosity together with a meditation practice helps ensure that our spiritual practice doesn't occur aloof from others. And then second, through the practice of generosity, we begin to understand where we are closed and where we're holding back and where we feel our fear. We learn what keeps us from being generous. And we take on the practice to see where we resist it. As an intentional practice, there are various exercises in generosity that can be helpful. This is an interesting one that I tried one time. Give yourself a week to give a $20 bill to someone you don't know. And watch what happens during that week. What does it bring up for you? How do you react? What do you learn about yourself in the situation? And Jack Kornfield teaches a practice of acting on every impulse to give, no matter what, during a 24-hour period. And if that seems too difficult, we could limit it to practicing of, giving small gifts. If you acted on every impulse to give, no matter what, during a 24-hour period. And another practice is to give $1 to every homeless person you encounter during a certain period of time. Generosity isn't limited to giving of material things. We can be generous with our kindness, with our receptivity. The forms of generosity are not really related to wealth. Generosity can mean the simple giving of a smile or extending ourselves to really listen to a friend. Makes me think of you, Sherry, when you go out for your walk and your next door neighbor's around and have conversation, and it's just generously, simple giving of a smile. And, paradoxically, even being willing to receive the generosity of others can be a form of generosity. Sometimes not as easy to do as giving. We're pretty habituated to giving, and it's harder to receive. But we can also give the gift of fearlessness, a quality that develops as we mature in our practice. We can become increasingly rooted in harmonious living, rooted in ethics and wisdom and fearlessness. Other beings have less reason to fear us. And in a world that's filled with fear, especially so much now, fearlessness is a much needed gift. One of the descriptions of an enlightened person is someone who helps dispel others' fears. The Buddha's teachings emphasize that the manner in which we give is as important as what we give. We should give with respect, with happiness, and with joy. When we're practicing generosity, if it doesn't bring happiness or joy, we could look closely at our motivations for giving, and sometimes even reevaluate whether we should be giving at all. The freedom of the Buddha, the freedom is from all forms of clinging. And the most obvious antidote to clinging is letting go. Because giving certainly involves letting go, it develops our capacity to relinquish clinging. But the practice of giving entails much more than letting go. It also develops qualities of the heart, such as generosity and kindness, compassion and warmth. So giving leads us to the heart of the Buddhist practice, while helping our practice be well-rounded and heartfelt. That's why we give ourselves kindness while we're sitting and hold ourselves in compassion. It helps keep the heart softened in the practice. The Buddha emphasized the joy of giving. It's not meant to be obligatory or done reluctantly, but dana should be performed when the giver is delighted before, during, and after giving. And at its most basic level, dana in the Buddhist tradition means giving freely without expecting anything in return. The act of giving is purely out of compassion or goodwill or the desire for someone else's well-being. Dana is almost more about how we are than what we do. And through generosity, we cultivate a generous spirit. Generosity of spirit will usually lead to generosity of action. But being a generous person is more important than any particular act of giving, because it's possible to give without it being a generous act. There's actually in the Anguttara Nikaya, it's called the Book of Eights, it is said, and this is a very interesting way to look at giving. Bhikkhus, there are these 8 grounds for giving. What 8? Number 1, one gives a gift from desire. Number 2, one gives a gift from ill will. Number 3, one gives a gift from delusion. So there's greed, hatred, and delusion. One gives a gift from desire, ill will, and from delusion. Number 4, one gives a gift from fear. Number 5, one gives a gift thinking, giving was practiced before by my father and forefathers. I should not abandon this ancient family custom. So there's giving out of pressure from the family, respect of the family, habit of the family. Now the last 3, number 6, one gives a gift thinking, having given this gift, with the breakup of the body after death, I will be reborn in a good destination in a heavenly realm. Number 7, one gives a gift thinking, when I am giving this gift, my mind becomes placid, and elation and joy arise. Number 8, one gives a gift for the purpose of ornamenting the mind, equipping the mind. These are the 8 grounds for giving. So I'll read the last 3 again. One gives a gift thinking, having given this gift with the breakup of the body after death, I will be reborn in a good destination in a heavenly world. One gives a gift thinking, when I am giving this gift, my mind becomes placid, and elation and joy arise. And the last one, one gives a gift for the purpose of ornamenting the mind, equipping the mind. That's interesting, giving a gift for ornamenting the mind. So yesterday, this is an interesting thing. Yesterday I made, for the first time, I tried this recipe for, what's it called? Well, it was a pudding cake. It's a pudding cake. Never did anything like this before. So you make the pudding. You make the pudding. I decided to put lemon in it to make it a lemon pudding. You put the pudding in the bottom of the pan, then you make the cake dough, and you put the cake dough on top of that pudding. It's really weird. So it's all smushed together. The cake falls to the bottom of the pudding, and you bake it. It gets nice and big and puffy. And then you sort of scoop it out to eat it because it's cake and pudding put together. So I made this big batch of it, and I've done this before. I take a few bites of it, and it's so sweet that I certainly don't want to eat very much of it. And luckily for me, I have neighbors on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sides of me who are all willing to accept my gifts of stuff when I make too much of it. So I saved just enough for Bill to taste when he got home. And I started texting the neighbors to see, who was home. I walked one batch of it over to my neighbor on the corner because they didn't respond, and I was going to leave it on their steps, but they weren't home at all, so I decided they were off on spring break or something. I walked to another neighbor's and left it on their porch, and then I asked them later if they were coming back because I had left this pudding on their porch. And then I texted the people across the street. They were up in Washington for the day, but their daughter was coming home after work, and she would like it when she got home. So it's like, is that a controlled giving? Because I didn't really want to keep it for myself, so I gave it away. Or was that a kind of giving? I mean, it certainly brought me joy and happiness in sharing it and giving it. And it wasn't like a miserly giving. But, maybe if it hadn't been so sweet, I would have kept it, but not really. There was so much in that gigantic container that I had to share it with all the neighbors. So I don't know, maybe it was for the purpose of helping others. But anyway, it was for the joy of giving. And of those 8 qualities for the grounds of giving, I would say I didn't think about my rebirth being in a heavenly world, but it did make my mind placid, and I had a kind of elation and joy that arose. So it's interesting to know those reasons for giving, because sometimes you might think, did I give a gift out of desire? Was I attached to something about the gift that I gave it? Or did I give it from ill will? Giving a gift from fear is kind of interesting. It makes me think of like times of the Buddha, since that was when this was written, times of the Buddha where, probably lots of townspeople had to give gifts to the kings. And, there was probably a lot of fear. They had to give this gift from fear because of maybe what would happen if they didn't. They had to support their kings and the kingdom and all that. So it's all pretty interesting. So I think that's all I have to say about generosity. And go ahead, speak up, Sherry.
Well, I have a question about number 8.
Uh-huh. One gives a gift for the purpose of ornamenting the mind, equipping the mind. I think that means like it's adorning the mind by giving. Let's see, what would be a better word to say that? Decorate?
Is it a negative?
Ornamenting. It is a verb. Equipping the mind.
Got it.
Ornamenting the mind. No, it's building up the mind.
I thought the mind was not the best thing that we've got going for ourselves.
But we have to train it in positive directions.
Okay. I'm with you now.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So those 3 are the positive ones.
I'd say they're a little more.
The other 5, yeah.
We're a little more habituated, or it's interesting to look at, when we're giving, to ask ourselves quickly, is this out of desire, ill will, delusion, fear? Am I doing it just because my family did it? I mean, and of course that's probably quite true in the Buddhist time because of things like merit. Donations are given to gain merit, and their parents did it, and their parents did it, and their parents did it.
I had quite a situation a couple of days ago where I went to Target. I was in the park. I pull up in the parking lot, and there is an older lady, not older than me, younger than me, with about a 30-year-old, obvious autistic, screaming her lungs out, and just a statue. I mean, she wasn't moving. And of course, people are passing by, walking by, just like, horrified, right? And I had my dog with me, and I grabbed her really fast, and I walked up to them, and I asked permission. I said, sometimes this will just change it enough. Would you like to pet the dog? And she just literally came back to her body. I mean, she was gone. And the caretaker was new to her. And they had stopped at Target to go to the bathroom. Well, she learned she's not going to ever do that again. And this poor woman who, I think she was probably early 30s, maybe late 20s, was coming down with early onset dementia. So it was, quite emotional, quite difficult. Lou and my dog was actually a little put off by it. I mean, I offered her up, but
yeah,
this young
little
girl
anxiety
was really
producing.
Screaming. Yeah, there was a lot of anxiety in the air, just kind of holding and walked her to her car, holding her hand, and holding on to her, and just sending love and affirmations and open heart to her. I got her in her seat and seat buckled, and off she went. But I find that I have these very amazing and intense experiences that are so I don't know if that's my learning, that they have to be that intense, right? I'm like, what is that all about? I mean, I laugh at it, but of course I just felt absolutely incredible afterwards. Truly, I mean, and my saying, as you know, is there but for the grace of the goddess go I, and that sense of, Lord, the stuff that is out in this world, and trying to hold that space. So
that's a great example of it benefiting you and the relationship that's the circular relationship of it. And it's almost like this number 8, you were adorning the mind in a way,
I guess.
The heart mind, we'll say. Yeah.
That's what was going on, I guess.
You don't know it's happening. It's just a spontaneous, generosity is a spontaneous act.
Yes.
Taking it on as a practice is
is
another thing, but yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
I find it interesting that Americans came to Buddhism through meditation versus these other two basic tenets, in essence.
Well, it's, a lot of it's because the Western folks in their 20s and early 30s at the time were seeking meditation, and they weren't living and growing up in a Buddhist society. where those tenets are the basis. And it was in Burma and Thailand and Sri Lanka and barely speaking English, and so the monasteries are teaching what they're teaching everyone who comes there, and just learning themselves, how to how to teach meditation and let Buddhism take its seed in the West. So, and Buddhism takes on the culture of every place that it goes. I mean, that's why there's like 87,000 forms of meditation, because there's Tibetan and Zen and Chan, and it goes on. But they all center around the tenets of the Four Noble Truths. So, but the pillars, the three pillars of the Dharma are Dana, Sila, and Bhavana. So we're just sort of coming around to understanding the importance of generosity and the importance of harmonious living and ethics. I guess we're almost finished. But we can talk some more, but I do want to dedicate the merit of our practice together to all sentient beings, and have so much gratitude to you for coming. And maybe we can still talk, though I'm happy to keep talking.